15 nannies tried, every single one quit within days. But when the humble cook stepped in, something happened that no one could have ever expected. Hello friends, where are you watching from today? Let me know in the comments and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. The Turner residence in Sao Paulo had the imposing elegance of a place meant to project order, success, and quiet dignity. A wide iron gate guarded the front, tall glass windows reflected the skyline, and manicured hedges lined the driveway. Yet inside, behind those walls of discipline and prestige, chaos reigned. It wasn't the kind of chaos one expected in corporate boardrooms or political campaigns, but the unrelenting kind conjured by 3 4-year-olds who shared the same birthday, the same mischievous spark, and the same ability to dismantle any adult's patience in less than an hour. Michael Turner knew this chaos too well. Sitting in his office, a laptop opened but unread in front of him, he listened to the commotion spilling down the hallway. Sophie's shrill laugh pierced first, followed by Peter's stomping feet and Luke's plaintive cry. Then came the crash, unmistakably porcelain, followed by the desperate voice of yet another nanny on the verge of tears. It had been 2 years since Marianne's death, and in that time, 15 women had passed through his house in the role of caretaker. Some lasted months, others barely a week. He had promised himself that he would find stability for his children, yet every attempt ended with resignation letters, tearful apologies, or in one instance, the nanny fleeing the house before sunrise. Michael told himself that grief made the children wild, but in darker hours he feared something worse, that he himself had failed to create the safety they craved. The door creaked open. A young woman in uniform, pale-faced and trembling, entered with her bag already packed. "Mr. Turner, I'm so sorry. I can't do this anymore." Her eyes darted toward the hallway, where Sophie's voice rose in mock command. "We're pirates now. Attack!" Followed by Peter's war cry and Luke's nervous giggle. Michael closed his eyes. Another one gone. He offered the woman a weary nod, unwilling to beg her to stay when her spirit was already broken. The nanny slipped out quickly, leaving the mansion quieter for a moment, before the next shriek carried in. It was then that Grace Johnson appeared. She was supposed to be in the kitchen, preparing dinner. Instead, drawn by the clamor, she stood at the threshold of Michael's office, her sturdy figure filling the doorway. At 52, with laugh lines etched deeply into her face and arms strong from decades of stirring, kneading, and chopping, she was not a woman easily shaken. "They've got too much fire in them to be left chasing shadows," Grace said, her voice even but touched with warmth. "Children need a task." Michael looked up, incredulous. "A task? They just turned the playroom upside down. I don't think a task will." Before he could finish, a small whirlwind of limbs darted past. Sophie, clutching a cushion as though it were a weapon. Peter followed, hollering, while Luke trailed behind, already on the verge of tears from the noise. Grace stepped forward, blocking their path with nothing more than her presence. "You three," she said firmly, "come with me. I've got something better than shouting in the halls." They froze, stunned by the tone, not the shrill reprimand of countless nannies, not the desperate pleading of grown-ups who had lost control, but a voice that assumed obedience as natural. Sophie narrowed her eyes, testing. Peter rocked impatiently on his heels. Luke clutched his sister's shirt. "What is it?" Sophie asked, suspicion dripping. "Work," Grace replied with a faint smile. "Real work. The kind pirates can't live without. I need a crew in the kitchen." Peter's eyes flickered with curiosity. "Work? Flour, sugar, chocolate. If you don't help me, I'll never get it ready in time. And what kind of pirates eat nothing?" It was absurd, Michael thought, to imagine his children, who had terrorized every professional nanny in Sao Paulo, following a cook into the kitchen. But to his amazement, Sophie lowered the cushion. Peter whispered something to Luke, who nodded shyly. And like that, the three marched after Grace, curiosity outweighing rebellion. Michael remained seated, dumbfounded. The echoes of chaos faded into the clatter of bowls and spoons. Then, faintly, a melody rose. Grace was singing. He couldn't make out the words, only the rhythm, steady, calming, threaded with humor. And then laughter followed. Not the shrieks of wildness, but the bubbling laughter of children absorbed in play that felt purposeful. For the first time in months, Michael realized the house was quiet. Quiet not with absence, but with harmony. He leaned back in his chair, the weight of disbelief heavy on his chest, and thought, what just happened? The next morning, Michael awoke to the smell of fresh bread, a scent he hadn't realized he missed. He descended the staircase expecting the usual wreckage of breakfast. Milk spilled, cereal scattered, 3 children demanding 3 different things. Instead, he found Sophie perched on a stool beside the counter, carefully tearing parsley leaves, Peter on tiptoe, measuring flour with exaggerated seriousness, Luke humming softly as he arranged slices of fruit on a plate. Grace moved among them like a conductor with her orchestra, guiding each small hand with patience, never raising her voice. Michael stood in the doorway, unseen for a moment, and felt something twist inside him. This should have been Mary Ann's scene. Mary Ann, who had adored mornings, who had believed children should be part of everything rather than pushed aside. He remembered how she had once balanced Sophie on her hip while stirring soup, or let Peter bang wooden spoons against pots as though they were drums. Luke, the quietest, had always curled close to her, content to watch. The memory burned. He had buried those images under work, under grief, under the endless rotation of strangers hired to fill the void. But here it was again, resurrected not by him, but by a woman who had come into his house to chop onions and roast chicken. Grace noticed him finally and inclined her head. Breakfast will be ready soon, Mr. Turner. The children turned in unison, their faces lit. Sophie beamed with pride. Daddy, I made this. She held up the parsley like a trophy. Peter puffed his chest. I measured the flour. Perfectly. Luke, shy, offered a plate with strawberries arranged in uneven circles. Michael's throat tightened. He wanted to praise them, but the words stalled. Instead, he ruffled Luke's hair and murmured, "Looks wonderful." Later, in his office, he replayed the morning in his mind. Why did it unsettle him? Perhaps because it proved what he had avoided. His children didn't need perfection, they needed presence. And presence had been the very thing he withheld, hiding behind meetings, contracts, and late nights meant to dull the ache of loss. His thoughts spiraled back to Mary Ann. She had been radiant even in simplicity, convinced that love was best shown through the ordinary. A shared meal, a bedtime story, a walk in the park. She had insisted that Michael slow down, but he rarely had. And when illness came for her, swift and merciless, he had been left with 3 small children and a mountain of guilt. A knock interrupted him. Grace entered, carrying a tray with tea. They're asking if you'll eat with them tonight, she said gently. Michael blinked. Eat with them. They want their father at the table. It doesn't have to be much. Just a meal. Her words were not a command, but a reminder. He hesitated, then nodded. I'll make time. Grace studied him for a heartbeat longer, as though weighing something unspoken, then left. That evening, the 4 of them sat around the long dining table, plates steaming with roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, and vegetables. Sophie insisted on saying grace, though her version rambled into a story about pirates who needed carrots to see in the dark. Peter interrupted with his own tale of treasure maps. Luke listened, wide-eyed, before softly adding that maybe the treasure was simply everyone together. Michael swallowed hard. Out of the mouths of children came truths sharper than any executive briefing. After dinner, when the children were finally asleep, he lingered in the hallway outside their rooms. He heard Sophie's breathing, steady and fierce even in slumber, Peter's restless turning, Luke's soft whimper as he dreamed. He pushed open Luke's door, sat at the edge of the bed, and brushed hair from his son's forehead. Luke stirred and murmured, "Don't go, Daddy." The words cut deep. Michael whispered, "I'm here." He stayed until the boy's breathing evened again, and only then did he rise, heart heavy but strangely lighter at once. Downstairs, Grace was cleaning the kitchen. Michael paused at the doorway. "I don't know how you managed it," he admitted. She shrugged with a modest smile. "Children need to feel useful, and they need to know someone will stay. That's all." Her words echoed long after he left the room, stirring something he had tried hard to bury, the fear that one day, his children would see him as another person who left. The house grew still, but Michael knew the silence carried a challenge. For the first time in 2 years, he wondered if it was possible. If healing could begin not with perfect solutions, but with flour on the counter, songs in the kitchen, and a woman who refused to quit. By the end of the week, the Turner household was unrecognizable. No one would have believed that this was the same home where Nannies had once fled in terror. The triplets woke with purpose now, their days shaped by small rituals Grace had carefully designed. Sophie set the breakfast table with surprising precision. Peter was in charge of fetching napkins and making sure everyone had water. Luke, who always moved more slowly, was entrusted with choosing the day's fruit, an assignment that filled him with solemn pride. Michael observed these changes from the edges at first. He still kept his briefcase by the door and his phone in hand, but each evening, when he returned from work, the sounds that greeted him were different. No more piercing screams or endless fights. Instead, bursts of laughter, the clink of bowls, the thrum of small feet rushing to show him what they had accomplished. Yet not everything was seamless. The children, sensing their father's hesitation, sometimes pushed back. Sophie challenged Grace openly, declaring that she didn't have to listen to a cook. Peter tested boundaries, running when told to walk, hiding toys in defiance. Luke, though gentler, collapsed into tears when denied extra sweets. Grace faced each rebellion not with punishment, but with steady firmness. One afternoon, Sophie threw a spectacular tantrum in the kitchen, insisting she didn't want to wash her hands before touching the bread dough. She crossed her arms, chin jutted defiantly. "You're not my mom. You can't tell me what to do." The words sliced through the room. Luke gasped. Peter smirked, delighted by his sister's boldness. Grace, however, did not flinch. She wiped her hands on her apron, bent so her eyes were level with Sophie's, and spoke softly enough that the girl had to lean closer. "I am not your mother, Sophie, but I'm someone who cares enough to keep you safe. Dough full of dirt won't taste good, and pirates never eat dirty bread. If you want to be captain, you have to lead the right way." For a heartbeat, Sophie's glare held, but then her lower lip trembled. Without another word, she marched to the sink and scrubbed her hands furiously, as though washing away more than flour. Grace hummed a tune while she waited, and the tension dissolved. Michael witnessed the scene from the doorway. He had intended to intervene, perhaps even reprimand Sophie himself, but something in Grace's method held him back. She had neither scolded nor yielded. She had reframed defiance into responsibility, and it had worked. That night, Michael couldn't sleep. Sophie's words replayed, "You're not my mom." He heard them not only as his daughter's defiance, but as a truth echoing through the house. No one was their mother anymore. Marianne's absence still defined every corner. He realized with a pang that his children were not only acting out from mischief, but from fear. Fear that every adult who entered their lives would eventually disappear, just as their mother had, just as every nanny had. The next morning, when Grace gathered them in the backyard for a new project, planting a small herb garden, Michael joined. He had no idea how to plant basil, but he knelt beside Luke and showed him how to press seeds into the soil. The boy's small hand fit inside his own, warm and trembling. Luke whispered, "Will they stay alive?" Michael swallowed. "If we take care of them together, yes. They'll grow." Grace, overhearing, gave him a fleeting smile. It was the first time he felt like a partner rather than a bystander in his children's lives. Still, not everyone would celebrate this fragile new order. For far away, Eleanor Turner was preparing her return. It was a Sunday evening when Eleanor's driver pulled up at the Turner estate, the trunk filled with designer luggage. The matriarch stepped out, impeccably dressed as always, her silver hair coiled into a perfect knot, her pearls glinting beneath the warm, Sao Paulo dusk. She had spent months abroad, first in Paris, then in Geneva, cultivating friendships and attending charity galas. But she had returned with a clear purpose, to restore what she considered order to her son's household. The front door opened to a sight that made her stop short. Her grandchildren, usually wild and unruly, were gathered around a low table in the living room, carefully painting clay pots. Sophie held hers proudly, a swirl of red and gold. Peter was covered in smudges of blue, and Luke concentrated so hard his tongue stuck out. Grace knelt beside them, steadying Luke's hand as he traced a line. Eleanor's eyes narrowed. "What is going on here?" The children jumped up with squeals of delight. "Grandma!" Sophie cried, running into her arms. Peter followed, though less eagerly. Luke clung to the edge of Grace's apron until coaxed forward. Michael entered from the study, surprised. "Mother, I didn't know you'd be arriving tonight." "I decided not to announce it," Eleanor said briskly. She kissed his cheek with precision before casting another glance at the scene she had interrupted. Clay pots. In the living room. They're for the garden, Michael explained, trying not to bristle. Eleanor raised a brow. I see. And is this woman responsible? Her gaze fell upon Grace, cool and appraising. Grace met her eyes calmly. Yes, ma'am. We thought the children might enjoy making something of their own. Enjoyment. Eleanor repeated, as though the word tasted foreign. She smoothed her gloves. Children need discipline, Michael. Not endless entertainment. Michael stiffened, but before he could reply, Sophie piped up. Grace makes everything fun. We made bread and plants, and that will be enough, Sophie. Eleanor interrupted. Her smile was tight, her voice sweetened with condescension. I'm sure your helper has done her best, but children must learn from professionals, not cooks playing school. The insult hung heavy in the room. Grace, to her credit, did not flinch. She rose, gathered the paints, and excused herself quietly, guiding the children to wash up for dinner. Alone with his mother, Michael exhaled slowly. She's been extraordinary with them. They're calmer, happier. For the first time in years, there's peace in this house. Eleanor's lips pressed thin. Peace built on indulgence is fragile. You need someone trained. I've already made inquiries. A woman named Martha Rosenberg, impeccable credentials, European training, fluent in 4 languages. She is precisely the kind of governess these children require. Michael rubbed his temples. Mother, we've been through 15 nannies. None lasted. Grace has managed what they couldn't. Because she panders, Eleanor snapped. You cannot confuse affection with authority. These children will grow into wild, entitled creatures if you let sentiment rule. Martha will bring discipline. She will bring structure. Michael's silence stretched. He remembered Sophie's defiance, Luke's whispered fears, Peter's restless energy. He also remembered the sound of their laughter in the kitchen, the sight of their hands pressing seeds into the soil. For the first time in years, he had glimpsed a future not built on absence, but on presence. Yet Eleanor's resolve was formidable. She had raised him with order and expectation, had carved a life of dignity from strict rules. To defy her now felt like pulling against iron chains. That night, as the children slept and the mansion grew still, Michael wandered into the kitchen. Grace was cleaning the last of the clay pots, her sleeves rolled up, hair slipping loose from her bun. She looked up as he entered, and something unspoken passed between them. His weariness, her quiet strength. They'll try to test me, Grace said softly, as though reading his thoughts. Maybe even you will. But I'm not afraid of storms, Mr. Turner. Children don't need perfection. They need someone who stays. Michael didn't answer, but when he returned to his room, Eleanor's words and Grace's words clashed in his mind. By morning, he knew the house had become an arena. 2 visions of education about to collide, and his children caught at the center. And somewhere in that tension, the balance of their future would tip. The Turner mansion felt charged, as though invisible lines had been drawn across its polished marble floors. Grace continued her daily rhythms with the children, guiding Sophie through numbers hidden in cookie recipes, teaching Peter the patience of waiting for yeast to rise, encouraging Luke to whisper stories to the herbs sprouting in the garden. Yet behind every moment of laughter lingered Eleanor's disapproval, hovering like a storm cloud ready to break. Michael felt it most acutely at the dinner table. Where once silence had been oppressive, now chatter filled the air, but with Eleanor's presence, conversation often turned into subtle skirmishes. Children, Eleanor began one evening, her tone crisp. Today we shall learn proper posture. Shoulders back, spine straight. Sit as though you were guests at the palace of a queen. Peter glanced at Grace, who had just placed mashed potatoes on his plate. She raised an eyebrow and straightened her own shoulders in an exaggerated pose, earning a suppressed giggle. Sophie puffed out her chest like a soldier, while Luke wriggled uncomfortably. Mother, Michael interjected. Perhaps we can let them be children at the table. Eleanor's eyes glinted. They can be children outside. At the table, they must learn refinement. One day, Michael, they will represent this family. They cannot appear uncultured. Grace said nothing, but later, in the kitchen, she let out a long sigh as she scrubbed pans. Michael lingered nearby. She doesn't mean harm, he offered weakly. Grace glanced up, her expression unreadable. Maybe not, but children know when love comes with conditions. The words struck deep. He wanted to defend his mother, to insist that Eleanor loved her grandchildren fiercely. But he also remembered his own childhood, the endless etiquette lessons, the cold silences after mistakes, the love that felt earned only through achievement. The next morning, Martha Rosenberg arrived for her interview. She was tall, severe, her blonde hair pulled into a bun so tight it seemed to stretch her features. She entered the living room as though inspecting a barracks, her gaze cool and appraising. The triplets lined up at Grace's insistence, fidgeting. Sophie crossed her arms. Peter picked at a loose thread. Luke leaned into Grace's side. Martha's smile was thin. Children, discipline is the highest form of love. You will address me as Miss Rosenberg. You will follow my rules. In time, you will thank me for it. Silence followed. Sophie whispered, just loud enough for Peter to hear. She's colder than ice cream. Peter snorted. Luke clung tighter. Eleanor, oblivious to the children's reactions, nodded approvingly. You see, Michael? Order. Confidence. She will restore balance here. But when Martha asked Sophie to demonstrate how she tied her shoes, the girl deliberately knotted them into a mess, then announced proudly, It's a trap. Peter hooped with laughter, and Luke added timidly, Pirates don't tie shoes. Within the hour, Martha excused herself. Her farewell was clipped, her face pale. She muttered something about impossible conditions and left in a flurry. Michael almost laughed, almost. But his relief was tempered by the look on Eleanor's face, icy with disappointment. You see now, she said, her voice low, your children have grown wild. This is what happens when you indulge them. They will drive away anyone who tries to civilize them. Or, Michael countered, surprising himself, maybe they need someone who actually sees them, not someone who arrives with rules before even knowing their names. It was the first time he had openly opposed his mother. Grace, quietly folding a dish towel in the corner, froze. A subtle shift had taken place. Michael had chosen a side. And in that choice, alliances were drawn. Life at the Turner household settled into a fragile rhythm. Eleanor stayed, determined to monitor Grace's influence. Grace continued her projects with the children, undeterred by icy stares. Michael walked the thin line between them, often retreating into his office, yet unable to ignore how much calmer his evenings had become. One rainy afternoon, while thunder rolled outside, Grace gathered the triplets around the kitchen table for an experiment. A jar of water, a spoonful of oil, and food coloring in vibrant drops. Watch closely, she said, stirring gently. The children gasped as colors swirled, refusing to blend, forming galaxies in miniature. It's like the sky, Luke whispered wide-eyed. Like explosions, Peter added gleefully. Sophie tapped the jar. Why don't they mix? Because they're different, Grace explained. But even different things can make something beautiful together. Michael, watching unseen from the doorway, felt the metaphor strike him squarely. His family had been fractured, mother against son, children against every nanny, himself against grief. And yet, in Grace's hands, even differences could become beauty. That night, after the children were asleep, Michael found Grace in the laundry room, bent over a basket of tiny clothes. But something else caught his eye. Scraps of fabric, threads, and the faint hum of a sewing machine. What's this? He asked. Grace startled, then sighed. Nothing really. Just projects. He stepped closer, examining. She had been stitching small pouches, each embroidered with the children's initials. But scattered around were receipts, notes, and sketches of teaching tools, counting beads, alphabet cards, simple science kits. You're making these for them? Michael asked, incredulous. Grace hesitated. They need more than toys. They need tools. Things to keep their hands and minds busy. I couldn't find what I wanted in the shops, so I made them myself. He noticed the circles beneath her eyes, the weariness etched into her face. When do you have time for this? Her answer was almost a whisper. At night, after they're asleep. Sometimes I stitch until morning. Michael's chest tightened. He imagined her alone in the quiet hours, sewing by lamplight, giving pieces of herself when she already gave so much during the day. Grace, that's not sustainable. You can't. I've done worse with less, she interrupted gently. This isn't sacrifice. It's purpose. But Michael saw the tremor in her hands, the exhaustion she tried to hide. He thought of how many nights he had sat numbly before spreadsheets, trying to drown his grief, while this woman, not bound by blood, poured out her energy to heal what he had left undone. Without thinking, he reached into his pocket and placed an envelope on the table. From tomorrow, your salary doubles, and you'll order whatever materials you need. No more sewing at 3 in the morning. Grace's eyes widened. Mr. Turner, that's not charity, he said firmly. Fairness. You're doing more for this family than anyone has in years. And I won't stand by while you wear yourself out. For once, she had no words. She lowered her gaze, blinking hard. From the hallway, Eleanor's silhouette emerged, her voice sharp. So it has come to this. You're elevating the help above her station, indulging her as you indulge the children. Where does it end, Michael? Michael met his mother's stare. It ends when this house is whole again. The words echoed long after Eleanor retreated into the shadows. Grace stood frozen, the envelope still in her hand. She looked at Michael with something unspoken, gratitude, fear, and a flicker of something neither dared to name. Outside, rain lashed the windows. Inside, a secret had been revealed, and a line crossed. The balance of power in the Turner house was shifting, one stitch at a time. The garden had begun to bloom. Basil sprouted in neat rows, parsley spread its delicate leaves, and even a few tomatoes clung stubbornly to thin stalks. For the triplets, it was more than a patch of soil. It was proof that their hands could bring something alive. Every morning they rushed outside, sometimes barefoot, sometimes still in pajamas, eager to water and check progress. Grace guided them patiently, showing Sophie how to trim without damaging stems, reminding Peter to wait before tugging at unripe fruit, encouraging Luke to speak softly as though the plants could hear. Michael, watching from the veranda, often felt a pang, both of pride and regret. He had been absent for so long, yet here he was, witnessing their laughter against the hum of bees. Eleanor, however, saw something else entirely. To her, the garden was chaos disguised as purpose. Dirt on clothes, grass stains on knees, shrieks of laughter where there should have been lessons in French verbs or scales on a piano. She tolerated it in silence for weeks, until one evening she summoned Michael into the study. "You're letting this go too far," she declared. Michael, weary from work, rubbed his forehead. "Mother, they're thriving. Can't you see? They've never been this happy." "Happiness is not the goal," Eleanor snapped. "Preparation is. Discipline. You think planting weeds will serve them when they must face the world? You're blinded by sentiment, Michael, just as you were blinded by that woman's smile when you were young." The mention of Marianne caught him off guard. "Do not speak of her as though she failed them." Eleanor softened slightly. "I don't. She was kind, yes. But kindness without structure leaves children weak. That is why I've spoken to Grace." Michael stiffened. "What do you mean?" "I offered her a chance at education," Eleanor said matter-of-factly. "A proper course in pedagogy, paid in full by me, but with conditions. She must step back, allow a trained professional to take primary charge of the children. An auxiliary nanny will handle discipline while she attends her studies." Michael's stomach dropped. He imagined the house without Grace's songs in the kitchen, without her firm but gentle voice corralling chaos into purpose. He imagined his children's faces if she withdrew, the betrayal of another disappearance. "And what did she say?" he asked quietly. Eleanor's eyes narrowed. "She is considering it. She understands, even if you refuse to. You should encourage her to accept. It's her chance to rise above servitude. Unless, of course, you prefer she remain bound to your household indefinitely, a cook who oversteps." Michael left the study without answering. That night he found Grace in the laundry room again, folding tiny shirts. Her expression was troubled. "Is it true?" he asked. She hesitated. "Your mother means well. She thinks she's offering me a future." "You already have one," Michael said sharply. Then, softer, "Here. With them. With us." Grace shook her head. "I don't want to hold them back. If the only way I can stay is by leaving a little, maybe it's worth it." Michael stepped closer, his voice firm. "No. We'll find another way. I'll pay for your studies. Weekends only. You won't leave them. You won't leave me to face this alone." For the first time, Grace looked startled. "You do that?" "Yes," he said simply. The silence stretched, heavy with things neither dared to speak aloud. At last she nodded, her eyes glistening. That night Michael lay awake, realizing he had crossed a line he could never retreat from. By defying his mother and claiming Grace's place in their home, he had chosen a future bound to her. There was no going back. At first, the compromise seemed to work. Grace enrolled in weekend classes at a local university, her arms full of textbooks she had never dreamed of owning. During the week, she remained with the children, guiding them through their growing routines. Michael noticed the change. She spoke with new confidence, her lessons sharper, her ideas blossoming. The children adored showing her what they had memorized, what they had grown, what they had baked. But with new hope came new tension. Eleanor grew colder, her disapproval sharpening with each passing day. She accused Michael of foolishness, of being manipulated. She is using you, can't you see? Stitching herself into this family until you can no longer tell where she ends and you begin. Michael refused to answer, but the words burrowed deep. One night, long after everyone had gone to bed, he passed Grace's door and saw light seeping through the crack. Against his better judgment, he knocked. She opened the door with surprise, and he saw the truth. Piles of fabric again, notebooks full of lesson plans. Her eyes ringed with exhaustion. "You're still sewing?" he asked, incredulous. She flushed. "The university doesn't cover everything. Materials, books. I thought if I made small things to sell." "Grace," he interrupted, voice firm. "You cannot give them your days and your nights. You'll burn out." She bit her lip, clearly torn between pride and weariness. "I'm fine." "No," he said, stepping closer. "You're not. And I won't allow you to destroy yourself for us. Not again." She stiffened. "For you? Or for the children?" The question struck deeper than she knew. Michael faltered, then answered with more truth than he intended. "For all of us. Because without you, this house collapses." For a moment, silence hung heavy. Grace lowered her gaze, her hands trembling over the fabric. "You shouldn't depend on me so much." They shouldn't either. But before he could answer, Luke's small cry echoed down the hall. Grace darted past him, rushing to soothe the boy. Michael stood frozen, the echo of her words gnawing at him. The next day, Eleanor confronted Grace directly in the kitchen. "Do you not see what you're doing to them? They cling to you as though you are their mother. You are creating dependency. One day you will leave, and they will crumble. Better to cut ties now than later." Grace, pale but resolute, whispered, "I never planned to replace their mother. I just wanted to help." Eleanor's voice softened, though her words were sharper than ever. "Help becomes harm when it turns into chains. Think carefully, Grace. Do you want a life of your own? Or to remain forever in someone else's shadow?" That night Grace sat alone in her small room, the weight of Eleanor's words pressing against her chest. She thought of her studies, of the dreams she had buried long ago. She thought of the children's laughter, their trust, their tiny arms wrapped around her. And she thought of Michael, of the way his eyes had softened when he said, "Without you, this house collapses." Tears blurred her vision as she whispered into the quiet, "What happens when they don't need me anymore?" The question lingered like a ghost, and with it came the first crack in her resolve, the first thought that perhaps, for their sake, for her own, she might have to leave. The house had grown quiet in a way that unsettled Michael. It was not the harmonious quiet of laughter spent, nor the peaceful quiet of children asleep. It was a fragile, heavy silence, the kind that follows after words meant to wound. Grace had been distant for days, her smile thinner, her voice gentler but restrained. She still guided Sophie through recipes, still steadied Luke's hand when he watered herbs, still laughed at Peter's jokes, but her eyes never lingered on Michael's anymore. He noticed the small signs. Her textbooks stacked higher in her room, resumes folded neatly into envelopes, the faint sound of phone calls taken late at night. She was preparing herself for something, perhaps an escape. One evening, after a particularly tense dinner where Eleanor lectured the children on the importance of sitting like heirs, not ruffians, Michael found Grace in the backyard, staring at the garden. Moonlight silvered the leaves, and her hands twisted nervously in her apron. "You're leaving, aren't you?" he asked quietly. Grace turned, startled. I just thought maybe I should see if there's a position at one of the schools. Somewhere I could use what I'm learning. Somewhere that doesn't blur lines." "Lines?" She exhaled. "I was hired as a cook, Mr. Turner. Now I'm more. Too much, maybe. Your children see me as someone I'm not. Your mother sees me as a threat. And you?" She faltered, her voice trembling. "You look at me as though I'm part of this family. But I'm not." Michael's throat tightened. He wanted to tell her she was wrong, that she had become the very heart of the household, but the words caught. Instead, he said, "The children need you." Grace's eyes filled. "And what happens when I can't stay? When I can't give anymore? Will they feel abandoned all over again?" Her voice broke on the word abandoned, and in that moment Michael saw the truth. Her fear wasn't only for the children. It was her own fear, carved deep from years of being overlooked, dismissed, discarded. He stepped closer. "Grace, listen to me. You are not temporary. Not to them. Not to me." Before she could reply, Eleanor's voice sliced through the night. "There it is. The confession I feared." They both turned. Eleanor stood at the edge of the veranda, her face hard as marble. "You have entwined yourself so completely that my son cannot tell where his duty ends and his indulgence begins." "Mother," Michael began, but Eleanor raised a hand. "No, you are blind. You think this woman has saved your children, but she has bound them to her, and now you to her as well. Do you not see the danger? When she leaves, and she will leave, their hearts will shatter, and yours will too." Grace's face blanched. Without a word, she turned and walked quickly inside, leaving Michael and Eleanor in the moonlit garden. Michael rounded on his mother, anger burning. "Why must you always assume love is weakness? Grace has given more to this family than anyone else. She's not the danger. Your refusal to trust anyone is." Eleanor's lips pressed thin. "One day you'll regret this." But Michael already knew regret. It had lived beside him since the day Marion died. The only question now was whether he would let fear dictate the future, or fight for what his heart already knew. The tension could not hold forever. It broke days later, when Grace announced she had scheduled an interview at a private school. She tried to present it casually, as though it were simply another step in her studies, but the children overheard. Luke burst into tears immediately, clinging to her leg. Sophie shouted, "You can't go. You promised you'd stay." Peter, usually so brash, stood frozen, his eyes wide with betrayal. Michael's heart cracked at the sight. He dismissed them gently to their rooms, then turned on Grace. "How could you?" Her chin trembled. "I thought it was best. For them. For me. Your mother is right. Maybe I've blurred too many lines. You think abandoning them will help?" His voice rose. "Do you have any idea what that would do to them? To me?" Grace flinched. Tears welled, but she held her ground. "They'll survive. Children do. What they can't survive is clinging to someone who doesn't belong forever." Before Michael could reply, Eleanor entered. She had overheard enough. "Finally, some sense," she said coldly. "Better to leave now than to drag this farce further." Michael turned on her, his fury unrestrained. "No. Enough. You will not push her out. You will not dictate this house anymore. I decide what's best for my children, and I decide who belongs here. Grace stays. Not as help. Not as a substitute. As family." The room fell silent. Grace's breath hitched, Eleanor's eyes widened, and Michael felt the full weight of his words settle like a stone. He had spoken aloud what his heart had known for months. Grace whispered, "Family." Michael met her gaze. "Yes, family." Eleanor looked between them, her face pale, her composure cracked for the first time. "You would choose her over your own mother?" "I'm not choosing against you," Michael said quietly. "I'm choosing for us. For the children. For the future." The confrontation ended not with resolution, but with silence. Each heart laid bare. Eleanor retreated, shaken. Grace stood trembling, caught between relief and fear. And Michael, for the first time, felt as though the battle lines had been drawn clearly. That night, as the house slept, he walked through the garden, past the herbs the children had planted, past the soil that still held traces of small hands. He knew the real confrontation was yet to come. His mother's resistance, Grace's doubts, his own grief, all of it would collide soon. But for once, he did not feel alone. He was preparing, not for survival, but for something greater, the fight for the family he had nearly lost, and the love he had only just begun to admit. The offer came on a Thursday morning, slipped across Michael's desk in a crisp envelope stamped with the company's seal. A transfer. Brasilia. A promotion that would place him closer to the seat of power, a move that could define his career. For a moment, he stared at the letter, torn between pride and dread. It was everything he had worked for, and everything that could unravel the fragile balance his family had found. That evening, he gathered everyone in the living room. Grace sat stiffly on the armchair, her hands folded. Eleanor perched regally on the sofa, her gaze sharp. The triplets sprawled on the rug, half listening, half absorbed in their drawings. "I've been offered a new position," Michael began carefully. "In Brasilia. It would mean moving. All of us." The children froze. Sophie's crayon snapped in half. Peter shot upright, eyes blazing. Luke whispered, "But what about our garden?" Michael swallowed. "We could make a new one there. Together." Sophie shook her head violently. "Not without Grace." "Yeah," Peter added, fists clenched. "If she doesn't go, we don't go." Luke clung to Grace's arm, his voice trembling. "We need her." The words struck harder than any boardroom ultimatum. Michael looked at Grace, who sat frozen, her face pale. Eleanor broke the silence first. "This is absurd. You are their father, Michael. Not this woman. They will go where you tell them." But Michael heard only his children's voices, echoing with fear and loyalty. He knelt beside them. "If Grace agrees, she will come with us. That's the only way." Grace blinked, stunned. "Michael, He cut her off gently. "You belong with us. You've proven that every day. If you'll come, the answer is yes." Tears filled her eyes. She looked at the children, their small faces pleading, and at Michael, his gaze steady for once, stripped of hesitation. Slowly, she nodded. "Then yes, I'll come." The triplets erupted in cheers, clinging to her as though afraid she might vanish. Eleanor rose, her face ashen. "You're making a mistake, Michael, binding yourself, in them, to someone who was never meant to be permanent." But Michael shook his head. "No, the mistake would be letting her go." Weeks later, they arrived in Brasilia. The air was different, drier, sharper. The new house stood smaller than the Sao Paulo mansion, but sunlight poured through the windows, and the garden, though bare, was full of promise. Grace immediately set the children to work, digging patches of soil, while Michael unpacked boxes and watched. That night, after dinner at the smaller table, the children begged for a story. Grace began softly, weaving a tale of seeds that traveled far from home only to grow stronger in new soil. Michael listened, his heart swelling with something he hadn't felt in years, certainty. And when the story ended, he cleared his throat. "There's something I need to say." Grace looked at him, puzzled. Eleanor, who had reluctantly followed them to Brasilia, sat watching warily. The children leaned forward, expectant. Michael took Grace's hand. "You came into this house as a cook. You stayed as a friend. You became family. And now, I realize I can't imagine life without you. Grace Johnson, will you marry me?" The children gasped, then squealed with delight. Sophie clapped her hands. Peter jumped up shouting, "Yes, yes." Luke buried his face in Grace's lap, whispering, "Please say yes." Grace sat frozen, tears streaming down her cheeks. She glanced at Eleanor, whose eyes shone with shock, but also something softer, almost broken. Then she looked back at Michael, at the man who had finally found his way back to fatherhood, to love. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will." The room erupted in cheers, laughter, and even Eleanor, though silent, did not walk away. It was the moment of truth, and for once, truth had brought them all together. Years passed, and the rhythms of life reshaped themselves. Grace studied diligently, attending weekend classes until she earned her degree in pedagogy. Michael balanced work and fatherhood with newfound presence, never again hiding behind late nights or endless meetings. Eleanor softened gradually, her sharp edges worn down by the undeniable joy blooming in her grandchildren. The children thrived. Sophie became bold and curious, channeling her fire into leadership at school. Peter discovered a love for building and tinkering, always eager to understand how things worked. Luke, sensitive and thoughtful, began to write stories, his notebooks filling with dreams. When Grace graduated with honors, the entire family attended the ceremony. Michael held her hand as she walked across the stage, the children cheering louder than anyone else. Eleanor dabbed her eyes discreetly with a handkerchief, though no one mentioned it. With her degree complete, Grace pursued her vision, a school unlike any other, where learning came through participation, where love and discipline walked side by side. She called it Jardim de Grace. Within years, it became a model for educators across the city, a place where children thrived not because of rigid rules, but because they were seen, valued, and guided with care. On opening day, Michael stood at her side, watching children run into classrooms painted with bright colors, gardens blooming outside each window. The triplets, now older, helped guide the younger students, proud to show off what they had learned. That evening, as the family gathered in the garden behind the school, Eleanor raised a glass. Her voice, though still elegant, trembled with humility. "I was wrong," she admitted. "I thought order alone could raise children. But it was love, steady, patient love, that gave them wings. Grace, you gave them back their father. And you gave me the chance to see what family truly means." Grace's eyes filled, and Michael pulled her close. The children cheered, and laughter echoed across the yard. Decades later, when the triplets were grown and the school flourished under new teachers, the family still gathered in that same garden. Grace and Michael sat side by side, their hands intertwined, watching grandchildren chase fireflies. Eleanor, older and frielier, smiled faintly as she whispered to Grace, "Love was the better method all along." The stars shimmered overhead. Michael glanced at Grace, and she at him, both knowing the truth, that out of chaos, grief, and doubt, they had built not just a family but a legacy. And in the laughter of children running through the night, they heard the proof that love, lived daily, was the greatest education of all. If you made it this far, leave us a comment telling us where you're watching from today and what you thought of the story. If you can, share this video with your friends and family, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell to receive new videos. A big hug, and see you tomorrow.